The following is a production of Medfield TV, Community Shows.
Good evening and welcome to our special town meeting. I am Scott McDermott, your town moderator, and I'm honored to have the opportunity to be here with you for this important meeting. Tonight is an exercise in direct democracy. The words, "we the people," have real meaning in this room tonight. Tonight we are engaged with both the history and the future of Medfield, and I'm advised by our town clerk that we have a quorum present. Thank you all very much. Come back to the annual town meeting, please. We have two articles of different character to address as the legislative body of the town of Medfield. But first, we were delighted to have a performance by a Medfield High School string quartet, so I want to thank Catherine and Garrett and Anna and Mariana. So thank you very much. Thank you. These four young people are a great example of the talent and the commitment of our students in music, in the performance arts, in citizenship, in athletics, and I think we can all find inspiration and energy in the spirit of these folks. Thank you again. Okay. I will now ask the town clerk to read the return of service of the warrant.
By virtue of this warrant, I have notified and warned the inhabitants of the town of Medfield qualified to vote in elections and at town meetings by posting attested copies of same at 5 public places 14 days before the date of the special town meeting as within directed. Constable Robert Flaherty, dated October 31st, 2019.
Thank you. I'm honored to invite all the veterans in attendance to please stand so we can acknowledge your service. Thank you. And I'd ask everyone else, if you would, to please stand for the Pledge of Allegiance to be led by our veterans. I pledge allegiance to the flag
of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Please remain standing. I'd like to invite Matthew McGrory, a Medfield High School senior who's going to sing the national anthem.
Oh, say, can you see by the dawn's early light what so proudly we held at the twilight's last gleaming, whose broad stripes and bright stars through the perilous fight o'er the ramparts we watched were so gallantly streaming, and the rocket's red glare, the bombs bursting in air, gave proof through the night that our flag was still there. Oh, say, does that star-spangled banner yet wave o'er the land of the free and the home of the brave?
Awesome. Be seated, please. Thank you. Thank you, Matthew. Further evidence of the talent that I was referencing. Okay, now the introductions of our town officials that are on the stage. Our town clerk, Carol Mayer, is 2 seats to my right. Sitting next to me tonight, I have the pleasure of introducing our special town council for tonight's meeting. Jay Talaman is a municipal attorney. He's highly experienced in zoning matters, the town moderator in Norfolk, and a native of Medfield. So welcome, Jay. Jay is with us tonight because Mark Sorrell, who our admirable town council, is actually presiding as a moderator at Medway's annual town meeting this evening. So good luck to Mark in Medway. I hope everything goes just as smoothly, respectfully, and warmly as I expect it to go here tonight. Now, consistent with our tradition, I would ask the Chairman of the Board of Selectmen, Gus Murphy, to introduce the executive branch of our town government.
Good evening. To the right of Carol is Evelyn Clark, the town executive assistant. To her right, Nick Milano, the assistant town administrator, who is attending his first town meeting. So if you throw tomatoes, don't throw them at him. To Nick's right, we have Christine Trierweiler, the town administrator. I'm Gus. To my right, I have Pete Peterson, and to his right on the end is Mike Marcucci, both selectmen with me on the Board of Selectmen.
Thank you, Gus. And to my left is my friend Mike Pastorian, chairperson of the Warrant Committee, and he's going to introduce the members of the Warrant Committee.
Good evening. Nice to see so many people out here to vote on Medfield TV tonight. To the left of me is Joanna Hilbert, Newton Thompson, Christine Barden, Jeremy Marset, Bob Sliney, and Amanda Hall.
Thank you, Michael. At this time, we need to make a motion to permit non-voting participants to sit within the town meeting and to speak to the community as requested. We reserve a special visitors section of the meeting for this purpose, and I would ask Evelyn Clark, the Administrative Secretary to the Board of Selectmen, to read the names.
Jeffrey Marsden, Superintendent of Schools. Christine Trierweiler, Town Administrator. Nicholas Milano, Assistant Town Administrator. Michelle Garrett, Police Chief. William Carrico, Fire Chief. Maurice Goulet, Director of Public Works. Amy Colleran, Facilities Director. Sarah Raposa, Town Planner. Joy Ricciuto, Town Accountant. Andrew Foster, Assistant Town Accountant. Yvonne Remillard, Principal Assessor. Leslie Willits, Conservation Commission Agent. Roberta Lynch, Council on Aging Director. Kevin Ryder, Parks and Recreation Director. Pamela Gardner, Library Director. John Coogan, Veteran Service Officer, and as Mr. Challerman was introduced, as Special Counsel.
Thank you, Evelyn. I move that these non-voting guests sitting in the visitor section be permitted to join our town meeting and to speak to the community as requested. All in favor, please say aye. Aye. Opposed? Okay, thank you very much. I now ask that anyone else sitting anywhere in this town meeting who is not a registered voter in Medfield or who did not go through the registration process administered by the town clerk and the registrars to please remove yourself to the visitors section. I'm going to review the meeting guidelines and the order of proceedings. Our general meeting guidelines are set forth in pages 1 and 2 of our warrant report. So we can dispense with the reading of the full set of guidelines, but I will make a quick reference to a couple of the guideline provisions. On number 5 references the fact that the discussion and the vote are not on the article as printed in the warrant, but rather on the motion that is on the floor for consideration. The main motion will be made by a member of the warrant committee. Number 6, the moderator will allow only one motion to amend to be pending on the floor at any one time. Number 10 references the fact that I will tonight be enforcing discretionary time limits on speakers. And number 13 references the fact that the moderator shall preside and regulate the proceedings, decide all questions of order, and make public declarations of votes. For guidelines, the order of the proceedings for tonight will be as follows. We will first address Article 1, which is an administrative article sponsored by the Board of Selectmen. It can be found on page 7 of the warrant report. I will call upon the warrant committee to make a motion and provide a brief report. Warrant Committee member Christine Barton will make the motion and provide the report. Article 1 requires a simple majority. We will then move on to Article 2. Article 2 is found on pages 7 through 40 of the report of the warrant. I will call on the Warrant Committee again to offer the main motion and to provide a report and recommendation on this article. Warrant Committee member Joanna Hilbert will make the motion and provide the report. We will then hear from the chairperson of the Planning Board, Sarah Lemke, who will provide a report on the article. The report reflects the deliberations of the Planning Board and is required by the statutes of the Mass General Laws. We will then have a 10-minute presentation by members of the Medfield State Hospital Planning Committee and the Medfield State Hospital Development Committee. After the presentation, I will recognize Gus Murby, Chairperson of the Board of Selectmen. He will provide comments from the Selectmen on this article. Following the comments from the Selectmen, there will be a dedicated question and answer period designed to bring clarity. We're looking to explore the simplicity on the far side of the complexity of this issue. Any voter wishing to ask a question should go to the nearest microphone, either of the microphones, number 1 or 2, and upon recognition by the moderator, should identify her or himself by name, street address, and town office, if any. Only questions, as opposed to advocacy or argument, will be permitted during the dedicated question and answer period, designed to provide clarity. I do have a note here that intonation patterns characteristic of questions often involve a raised pitch near the end of the sentence, punctuated with a question mark. So that's how we'll determine if it's a question. Following the question and answer period, after that question and answer period, I will open the floor to the proponents and the opponents of the motion on the article. Through my discretion, I have authorized a 10-minute presentation from 2 respected members of the opposition. After their presentation, any voter wishing to speak to the town meeting should go to the microphone. For people who are opposed to the motion, will go to microphone number 1. If you're in favor of the motion, you will go to microphone number 2. That will allow us to see the proportion of the people who are opposed or in favor. All speakers shall be recognized by the moderator before providing their comments or views. All speakers shall speak to the community by generally addressing their comments and views through the moderator. I will enforce discretionary time limits on speakers. I will initially be granting a time period of between 2 and 3 minutes to speakers. Later, as we go along, I may reduce that time period to 1 minute for final comments. At the end of each time period, I will thank the speaker, and the speaker should then complete his or her remarks. And I ask that speakers please do not be offended when I ask you to complete your remarks. Please understand that we are trying to balance due consideration, informed dialogue, and fairness with a full flavor of expediency. So let's get started. Do we have a motion on Article number 1?
We do, Mr. Moderator. Move that the town appropriate the sum of $145,356.71 from the Public, Educational, and Governmental Access and Cable-related Fund to Medfield TV for the purpose of providing local cable access services, equipment, and programming for the town of Medfield.
And do you have a report, please?
Yes, we do. At the 2019 annual town meeting, Article 5 was approved to create a public, educational, and governmental access and cable-related fund as the accounting mechanism before the funds could be distributed to Medfield TV. This was in response to a new guideline issued by the Massachusetts Department of Revenue on how cities and towns handle the distribution of funds received in connection with the franchise agreements between the town and the cable operators. It requires that the funds be appropriated by town meeting, so this article requests a transfer of those funds collected to date to Medfield TV. The Warrant Committee recommends passage.
Are there any questions or comments regarding Article 1? If there are none, we'll put it to a vote. It carries with a simple majority. All in favor, please say aye. Aye. Opposed? I deem that it carries. Do we have a motion on Article number 2.
We do. Move that the town vote to amend the code of the Town of Medfield, Chapter 300 zoning by adding a new Article 300-20, Medfield State Hospital District, as printed in the warrant, and further to amend the official zoning map as printed in the warrant, except in Section 2 definitions, MSHD map, substitute 89 acres for 135 acres, Section 3A, establishment of Medfield State Hospital District, substitute 89 acres for 135 acres, and Section 3B, subzones, substitute 6 subzones for 8 subzones. The warrant committee recommends passage.
And do you have a report?
I do. Article 2, if passed, will rezone the Medfield State Hospital site to allow a variety of mixed residential and commercial uses. Once the zoning is in place, the Board of Selectmen have indicated that they will issue a request for proposals, a so-called RFP, in order to solicit specific proposals for redevelopment of the site. The Warrant Committee recommends passing the zoning article in order to move the redevelopment process forward. The cost of not passing the zoning article at this point is that the site would remain in status quo, which currently costs the town approximately $200,000 per year. Although we have been fortunate that the hospital site has generated revenue from several movie projects in the past, which have helped defer this cost, this is not a guaranteed stream of income that we can rely on in future years. Moreover, eventually the $200,000 will no longer be sufficient to maintain the site as the buildings continue to deteriorate. The cost of mothballing the buildings is estimated to be approximately $500,000 to $700,000, and the cost of demolishing the buildings is estimated to be approximately $25 million. Thus, the status quo is not sustainable long-term, and it is fiscally prudent to explore redevelopment options at this point. We have been instructed by the Medfield State Hospital Development Committee that we are unlikely to receive any serious bids from developers unless we have zoning in place first. Tonight, you will hear many references to the master plan and the preferred scenario. However, it is important to remember that the preferred scenario is just that, a scenario. We are not voting on reuse of the hospital site tonight, only on zoning. The zoning article, if passed, will allow implementation of the preferred scenario, but it will also allow the implementation of many other development scenarios, some of which may differ greatly from the preferred scenario. In fact, the Development Committee has solicited requests for information from developers, and the information that they received back from developers indicated the possibility of a variety of uses ranging from ones that closely mirror the preferred scenario to different scenarios altogether. It is likely that once the Board of Selectmen issue an RFP, the proposals they receive back will also reflect a range of different options. Because there is no specific redevelopment proposal in front of the town at this point, the Warrant Committee's recommendation tonight is not based on the financial viability of any particular proposal. If and when the Board of Selectmen settle on a redevelopment proposal that they believe is in the best interest of Medfield, the Selectmen must come back to the town meeting and receive a 2/3 positive vote in order to sell or lease the land. In addition, if the selected proposal involves any source of funds from the town, such as for infrastructure or otherwise, the appropriation of that funding will also need to be approved at town meeting. The Warrant Committee will review the impact to the town of such a proposal at that point and will make a recommendation to the town based on financial and other non-financial considerations as is mandated by our charter. Although the Warrant Committee's recommendation tonight of support for the zoning article is not based on the financial impact of a particular redevelopment, we did review the financial models created by the Medfield State Hospital Master Planning Committee in order to determine whether the preferred scenario has a possibility of being viable. If there was no possibility of viability, it would be a waste of taxpayer money to pass the zoning bylaw and pursue an RFP process that would ultimately fail. The Warrant Committee is satisfied, based on the due diligence performed by the Master Planning Committee in their creation of financial models, that the preferred scenario has a reasonable possibility of viability for the town. However, we reserve judgment on any actual redevelopment scenario until we have a real proposal before us. Given our assumption that the town will not receive serious redevelopment offers without having passed a zoning article, the Warrant Committee recommends approval of the zoning article so that we can move the process forward and at least have a real proposal to compare against the real costs that the town is currently facing. If and when the Board of Selectmen select a specific redevelopment proposal for the site, the Warrant Committee will review the fiscal impact of such proposal and make a recommendation to the town at that time. The Warrant Committee recommends passage of Article 2.
Thank you. And now we have a report from the Planning Board.
Thank you, Mr. Moderator. For the record, Sarah Lemke, 172 Harding Street, Chair of the Planning Board. I have a short report, and I wanted to mention that members of the Planning Board are here if there are any questions after our report. Pursuant to the provisions of the Massachusetts General Laws, Chapter 40A, Section 5, as amended, the Medfield Planning Board held a series of public hearings on October 3rd and 21st, 2019, to consider amending the Town of Medfield zoning bylaw, as set forth in Article 2. The public hearing was duly posted and advertised in the Medfield Press on September 13th and 20th, 2019. The Medfield Planning Board strongly recommends passage of the state hospital zoning bylaw. The zoning bylaw represents an opportunity for the town of Medfield to preserve and adaptively reuse the historic buildings in core campus to manage future growth and meet town goals, all while creating a framework under which any proposed development could be fully reviewed and vetted. The Planning Board has been supportive of the Master Planning Committee and their ongoing effort to create a reuse plan since the property was acquired in 2014. We have relied on Planning Board member Teresa James, who is a member of the Master Planning Committee, to provide regular reports of the State Hospital Planning Committee's meetings. The Planning Board held multiple joint meetings with the Planning Committee to review the preferred use scenario and the proposed zoning and design framework over the last 2 years, culminating at 2 public hearings in October where members of the public were invited to provide feedback, and this feedback was considered and reviewed, including some edits that were made to the zoning bylaw. I'd like to take just 1 minute to give a very short overview of the zoning bylaw. The bylaw creates 6 zones in the area of the State Hospital north of Hospital Road. The area south of Hospital Road has been taken off the table for this evening to be considered at a future town meeting. The 6 areas are the Green, the Arboretum, the Core Campus, the North Field, the West Slope, and the Water Tower. Those areas can be reviewed at the end of the warrant and also in the handout that was provided outside. Within these zones, the bylaw indicates in Section 5, Table 1, which uses are permitted and which are prohibited. The uses are either permitted by right, by special permit from the zoning board, or by site plan approval from the planning board. As an example, single-family homes are permitted only in the Arboretum area, while multifamily, senior housing, and limited commercial uses are permitted in the Core Campus and the West Slope. Any housing development that was proposed would be required to have between 15% and 25% affordable housing, consistent with the town's inclusionary housing bylaw, and also with the town's goals of advancing more affordable housing and our 40B compliance. Open space and passive recreation are designated for the Green, the North Field, and the Water Tower districts. consistent with the town's desire to maintain these areas as open space and to preserve view sheds. In addition to regulating uses, the bylaw in Section 13 imposes design guidelines on any development proposed within the district. These design guidelines are extensive and detailed, aimed at preserving the look and feel of the historic buildings and existing open space. A project's compliance with the design guidelines will be subject to review by the Planning Board pursuant to the plan approval procedures described in Sections 9 through 12 of the draft ordinance. These include a full application with supportive materials, a noticed public hearing at which point public comment would be received and reviewed, and the ability to impose conditions that would mitigate any impacts of the project. The Planning Board believes the proposed bylaw is sound, enabling the town to evaluate redevelopment of the state hospital against town objectives, and to review the details of any proposed project against measurable criteria in the future, imposing any conditions that the town feels is appropriate based on the impacts of the particular project. As noted, this is not the adoption of a particular plan or the approval of a particular project. The opportunity to fully review any project will be considered by the Select Board on the disposition, which disposition would be subject to further town meeting review, or when the proposed project is reviewed by the Planning Board, the Zoning Board, at the plan approval process during the zoning ordinance. The Planning Board voted unanimously to recommend passage of Article 2. Thank you.
Thank you. Just referencing that the Medfield State Hospital District and the subzones are depicted on page 39 of the warrant report, because they will be referred to many times this evening, so just to let you know that that display is there. So next we're going to have a short presentation from Randy Karg, who is a member of the Medfield State Hospital Planning Committee, and from Todd Trabanko, who's a member of the Medfield State Hospital Development Committee.
Hello, everyone. I'm Randy Karg, and I'm a member of your Hospital Master Planning Committee. Along with my colleague, Todd Trabanko from the Development Committee, we're pleased to be with you all tonight, and we'd like to give you an overview of our process and activity. So thank you very much for showing up. And I'd like to begin with an overview of the Planning Committee activity. Master Planning Committee was chartered in 2014 to create a plan for the hospital site. We delivered the results of our deliberations in the form of a preferred scenario to the Board of Selectmen in the summer of 2018. Overall, we shared 3,500 hours together in more than 80 meetings, and an equally significant extra effort in subcommittee activities. The town also invested hundreds of thousands of dollars in professional consulting fees to support us. The design framework we delivered represents our best efforts to capture the town's aspirations and has received national recognition for the effectiveness of the public outreach that we used. It's important to note, this effort delivered a conceptual framework, not a buildable construction plan. This framework serves four purposes. Firstly, to confirm the town's goals and objectives for the site. Secondly, to test financial viability. Thirdly, to structure the content of appropriate zoning language to meet town objectives. And lastly, to guide and direct conversations with the development community. As expected, this framework has generated a lot of interest and conversation about the details, the number of buildings, residents, school children, traffic, and so forth. But these discussions are premature. We truly cannot have a substantive, fact-based conversation about these topics until a detailed plan is created. So I would encourage everyone to listen with good intent and seek to understand the concept that we've developed rather than engaging in conversations about the hypothetical impacts it may or may not have on our town. Despite the fact that the town took ownership of the hospital site in 2014, we're very much at the front end of the process with completion of the preferred scenario concept. Tonight, we're completing the second stage of the process. Zoning delivers the regulatory framework that guides the remainder of the project. If we gain zoning approval tonight, we'll seek out an appropriate development partner via review of proposals submitted by qualified developers. We'll then proceed to the next phase to negotiate a land disposition agreement with our preferred developer. The agreement must be approved by a town meeting vote in the same manner that we are approving the zoning language tonight. This vote is at least a year away. After that, we begin construction activities. At this point, I'd like to hand off to Todd, who will review his committee's activities and what they learned.
Hi, good evening. Todd Trebanco, Medfield State Hospital Development Committee. Thank you, everybody, for coming out tonight. We've been given a few minutes to summarize a lot of work, so I apologize in advance if I go a little fast. We will be around for questions throughout the evening, and then we have other members of the Development Committee here as well tonight. I just want to take a few minutes to talk about our committee and our process and what we found. So the Development Committee was formed in August of 2018 by the Board of Selectmen shortly after the Master Plan Committee, Randy's committee, had spent 4 years developing the plan and then delivering it to the town. And the idea behind our committee was the selectmen wanted independent real estate professionals, Medfield residents with commercial real estate experience, to take the plan and the so-called preferred scenario and take it to the broader real estate development community to bench test it, basically, to see what kind of reactions we would get if this was something that would be appealing or doable or sort of a non-starter in the development community. And we did that. Was not a formal bid process or request for proposals. We used an informal request for information, which was non-binding. And we sent an 8-page questionnaire out to a group of developers. We got 5 very substantive written responses back in. We collectively reviewed those responses, and then we met individually with all of the development firms that had responded to learn more about their thoughts. So the first thing we learned is that even though we were specifically looking for feedback on the so-called preferred scenario, we had some developers say, you know, our business plan with these types of properties is to demolish everything and build new construction. And they've been tracking the events at the hospital for years themselves, and they, took the opportunity to tell us about what they would do. So we had one firm specifically telling us that they thought the zoning should allow for 500 plus units, which is about 6 units per acre. Talking about the 87 acres now just north of Hospital Road. And the other firm didn't really give us a number, but had recently built out the former Westboro State Hospital site, which was 700 units on 37 acres, about 19 units per acre. Whereas the master plan calls for between 294 and 334 dwelling units, which is less than 4 units per acre. So, takeaway for our committee, there are alternatives out there to the master plan, but they're more intense than the DCAM plan that the town rejected in 2014, which was 440 units, and led to the town buying the hospital, which in a way is why we're all here tonight. We also heard from 3 major local developers, Boston-based, who specialize in the kind of resources envisioned by the plan, such as historic tax credits and housing tax credits, that they saw the master plan as viable, as feasible in their words, as a realistic approach with some flexibility for the town. And these are firms that are each go back between 30 and 50 years and have collectively done hundreds of projects involving housing tax credits. They see the hospital site as a natural fit and a good opportunity for the use of these tools, but they were very clear with us that the zoning change needed to come first, really for 2 reasons. Number one, the amount of resources they felt they would need to pour into responding to an official RFP. We had one developer tell us that they thought it would probably be $1 million for architectural plans for the buildings, environmental tests, surveys. We don't know if that's the right number or not, but clearly, that's how they look at it. These are all very successful, busy firms, and need to know that the zoning is going to be in place before committing resources. And then secondarily, I would say they feel the zoning, it's an indication that the town wants to do the project. They're not interested in cramming a project down the town's throat that the town doesn't want. And by passing the zoning, it's an indication that the town wants to continue in this direction, is actually interested in seeing a project like this done. So these developers primarily rely on historic and affordable tax credits. These are federal and state income tax credits. They're widely used in Massachusetts and every place else. The last year, just historic tax credits alone contributed to $438 million of renovation activity just in Massachusetts. And if you look at the last 5 years, it's $1.8 billion, billion with a B, just in Massachusetts. So these are the types of resources that these developers want to bring to this project. And of course, that's private investment. They sell those credits, and that provides money for the development that reduces pressure on the developer to do additional units, and some pressure on the town to pay for things that otherwise can be funded from the development. The master plan anticipates the base case about $63 million of tax credits. I just wanted to show briefly the types of firms that invest in tax credits. A lot of big banks, financial companies, technology firms. So, the idea that these developers, they would go out, they would raise money through the sale of these credits, and firms like this would be investors in this project, and the developer, in addition to being responsible to the town, is also responsible to these investors to deliver what they agreed to deliver in their investment agreement. So I just want to touch on a few things about controls as I wrap up. If the zoning were to pass and the process were to move forward, there's a series of direct and indirect controls that would apply. Direct controls, you've already heard some about this tonight. If this goes to an RFP, it's the town of Medfield that's writing the RFP. The town could set the limits on the number of units allowed. It can decide it wants less commercial, for example, than anticipated in the preferred scenario, or maybe would like to stage the development in a way. That's all something that the town controls and can solicit feedback on that basis. And the town could, of course, and should, reserve the right to reject all bids that come in if there's no plan that's acceptable. Additionally, the town would be negotiating terms and conditions with any development team that advanced in the process, including a land disposition agreement, which can contain reversion clauses of how the land would come back to the town if the development was not meeting the requirements that were agreed. And as has been noted, any specific disposition plan would come back before a town meeting for a vote. And all the town permitting processes would apply. And then finally, the indirect controls for a tax credit project are numerous, and it's why these projects have a very low default rate. The developer is guaranteeing the construction scope, on-time delivery. They're building what was permitted. The developer can't decide midstream to do half as many units or twice as many. It's simply not allowed. They're guaranteeing construction time frame and lease up of the buildings. They're posting reserves as a hedge against the project not having sufficient funds available in the case of cost overruns. And they are also looking to ensure that all the agreements that cover the property are being met, whether that's the specific nature of a historic renovation or how the land will be used, or let's say it's a senior project. They're monitoring to ensure that it's seniors that are living in the project. With that, I just wanted to hand it back to Randy. This is his slide. He's much better at PowerPoint than I am.
I'd like to continue on with the thought about control, and also with this slide incorporate another review of the process that we'll be going forward with. As you remember, local control was the primary reason for purchasing this property 5 years ago. If I may, I'd like to use an analogy to explain how the town will assure that we get what we want. Consider, if you will, a medieval castle guarding the crown jewels. In our case, these are Medfield's family-oriented rural values. Protecting Medfield's character while balancing the needs of all stakeholders is the core objective of this conceptual design. Surrounding the core are 3 protective layers. The first is the outer wall built upon the zoning warrant that we are considering tonight. There's a point of entree through this wall, and just as a castle gate provided access control to keep the bad guys out, we'll use a rigorous qualification process to only allow developers that meet our selection criteria through this outer barrier. Inside the outer wall lies the moat, and I must say it's wide and it's deep. and will likely spend a lot of time wallowing around in it. We enter the moat by requesting our qualified developers to submit proposals and then engage them in a significant, in-depth conversation about the details of their proposed plan and the potential impact on the town. This will require authentic inquiry, a bit of back and forth negotiation, compromise, and ultimately consensus. Or it may result in rejection of each and every proposal. If successful, the result will be a final plan and binding contract in the form of a land disposition agreement. This is one we'll be able to engage in truly fact-based conversation about the merits of a specific development plan. We exit the moat with a town meeting vote to approve the land disposition agreement. Scott, perhaps we might call it the moat vote?
Perhaps you might.
Or maybe not. The final inner layer of protection is a combination of the direct and indirect controls that Todd just reviewed with us. Town boards will actively oversee and approve all construction activities. In addition, the developer will be legally bound by the obligations that are part of the project financing packages used to fund the development. These obligations are structured to protect the investor community, and by extension, they also protect the town's interests. In summary, the assertion that the town will surrender control to a developer is simply not based upon a factual examination of the development process. There will be opportunities to weigh in with your opinion and approval in the future. We're not losing control of the site by approving the zoning warrant tonight. To close out our comments, I'd like to make 4 summary points for your consideration as you vote. Firstly, this is a thoughtful conceptual framework that incorporates the town's objectives for the site as listed on the last page of your warrant booklet. Secondly, the plan is economically viable and developers want to work with us. Thirdly, there are adequate methods to control development to meet town objectives. And lastly, by moving forward with this process, there's a potential for significant positive monetary and non-monetary benefits to the town with little downside risk. But we won't know what's possible without approving the zoning warrant tonight. Thank you all for being here tonight, and thank you, Mr. Moderator, for allowing us to share the results of 5 years of hard work and due diligence on behalf of the town.
Well, thank you. So next we have comments from the chairperson of our select board, Gus Murby.
Thank you, Mr. Moderator. The issue you're being asked to vote on with this zoning amendment article tonight is actually a very simple one. Do you think it's a good idea for the town to obtain commercial inputs from real estate developers to evaluate the potential feasibility of redeveloping the state hospital property along the lines of what is described in the MSH master plan? You've probably all been involved in discussions about the rezoning of the state hospital property in the lead up to tonight's meeting, and I am sure you will hear even more tonight. If you have, you know they are mostly focused on speculative projections of impacts from plans that don't actually exist. Currently, there is no specific plan for redeveloping the state hospital property. The MSH master plan represents an aspirational concept for repurposing the property. That master plan was developed over a 4-year period and cost about $500,000 to develop. The plan is based on what Medfield's residents told the MSH Master Planning Committee they would like to see done with the hospital property. The master plan was then subjected to a preliminary market assessment by the MSH Development Committee that was established about a year ago to take a closer look at the commercial feasibility of the master plan from a real estate developer's point of view. Results from the Development Committee's commercial review with developers indicated that the master plan was, in fact, potentially feasible. We were pleasantly surprised to hear several developers state that the master plan was fine as is. That confirmation from the developers doesn't give us a final answer on the MSH master plan, however. It's easy to say something looks fine if you don't have to put any skin in the game. We need actual proposals from developers to be sure that we know what's really possible. In order to get those proposals, the developers told us that we would need to pass the zoning changes required to support the project before they would invest hundreds of thousands of dollars to develop a proposal. They need to know that we're serious about redeveloping the property and we aren't just window shopping. And that's why this proposed zoning change is on the agenda tonight. The town would like to be able to go out and solicit real proposals to redevelop the state hospital property along the lines of what is described in the master plan. It's important to recognize that obtaining commercial market information is our primary purpose for requesting a zoning change at this point in the process. Certainly, if we receive a proposal that we think would be attractive to the town, we will move forward with a recommendation that the town authorize the disposition of the land to enable the proposed project to be carried out. That disposition approval, like this proposed zoning change, will require a 2/3 vote in order to move ahead. Town residents will only be asked to vote on the disposition after a specific proposal has been recommended and after the contract terms of an agreement with a developer are available for review by town residents. If no desirable proposal is received, then the town has obtained valuable market information about what is feasible, and we can take that information to figure out how to adjust our plans to bring them into line with commercial reality. Shortly after the town purchased the state hospital property in December 2014, almost 5 years ago, the MSH Master Planning Committee began the process of collecting detailed inputs from town residents on what they wanted to see the town do with the hospital property. So, this vote tonight represents a major fork in the road in our efforts to redevelop the state hospital property, but it doesn't represent the final fork in the road. Tonight, town residents are being asked to confirm that they meant what they told the MSH Master Planning Committee they wanted to see up at the state hospital. We need to know if you want the town to take the next step toward putting what is possibly the finest piece of developable property in Medfield to good use.
Thank you very much. So now we're going to go on to our dedicated question and answer period. Sarah, ask Todd, and Randy, why don't you step right up for questions? These would be questions that could be asked of the Planning Board, of the Medfield State Hospital Master Planning Committee, of the Medfield State Hospital Development Committee, of the Board of Selectmen, or of the Warrant Committee. So I turn to microphone number 2 for the first question. Thank you.
Hi, my name is Sarah Byrne. I live on 21 Hearthstone Drive. My question is, I heard that if historic tax credits are used, the housing units are rentals. Can you confirm this, and what is the justification for creating more housing in town? Thank you.
Please do, yes. Anybody from the Master Planning Committee or from the Development Committee or from the Planning Board that wants to stand up front would be great.
Whoops, there we are. Teresa James, MSH, MPC, and Planning Board member. And I'd offer Todd or Mike, who might join me in this answer. But regarding the housing tax credits, it is true that for the first 5 years they're rentals, but after that they may or may not be converted over into home ownership. And so I'd also like to remind us about the housing production plan that was passed and approved in 2015. That alone did help us address our 40B issue, but that addressed us in 2 things: the lack of affordable units, but it also identified a need to diversify Medfield's housing stock. And I will say that our Affordable Housing Trust Committee has done a wonderful job since 2015, getting us into safe harbor. However, that doesn't mean that, and the zoning, as Sarah mentioned, includes inclusionary bylaws. It has to have that, so we're going to always remain net neutral. So that high cost of housing, and the housing production plan also said that the high cost of housing and lack of housing diversity also have fiscal consequences. The prevalence of single-family homes and the reputation of Medfield School District to attract families with children, thereby increasing burden on municipal services while seniors, young adults, and smaller households cannot afford to stay in the community. The housing production plan also says if you want more taxpayers but fewer student costs, that we need to diversify that housing stock for seniors, young adults, and smaller households who can't afford to stay here now. And Medfield currently has a very smaller rental population, less than 10%. The Housing Authority identified a need for more rental for families on a regular basis. So what's important that we talk about that housing stock is that zoning bylaw that you see, the use types, represent use types that don't exist in our existing zoning today, such as that artist live, some of that senior housing, and things of that nature. So, so it's very evident from the housing production plan. So we may solve a 40B issue before Medfield State Hospital is built, but we still need to address this lack of diversity throughout our town. So, and this rezoning will help us get to proposals that can evaluate that.
Thank you. I'll go back to microphone number 2.
Good evening. My name is Liz Horgan. I live at 16 Juniper Lane. There was a question mark at the end of that. My question is for the Master Planning and the Development Committee, and it's about the historic viability of the buildings. Could you talk about the approach that you took to ensuring that we could preserve the historic nature of the buildings?
Well, the property's on the National Register currently, and I believe the town signed an agreement with Mass Historic in 2014 to evaluate the use of historic tax credits. And generally speaking, the characteristics of the property up there fit the program very well. Some of the firms we met with have national reputations for doing this kind of work. They've been out to the property. They've been out to the property before we went to see them. I think they've been following this for years, and they're very enthusiastic about it, and they see it as a good fit.
Microphone number 1.
Bob Allison, 120 Green Street. I'm not sure who my question is for. I've heard a lot tonight about how we're not giving up control, that the selectmen will be evaluating things and bringing back to the town meeting, and that we will have to vote on it again a couple times. But I don't see any of that written here in what we're voting on tonight. So my question is, what regulations require that, and how do you square that with Section 11, in particular F and H, which say that when a developer brings a proposal to the planning board, the plan approval authority shall approve the proposal if it meets the requirements. And if that's not strong enough, H says that they can only deny it if it doesn't meet the requirements. Requirements are simple, that they paid the fee, that they've put in the trees and drainage and things for the nearby property, and that they meet the things that are in here. And none of that is anything about financial viability. So how do you square the fact that we're going to have to come back here with what's written down with what we're voting on?
Sarah?
Joanna? I'll defer to the select board on the financial viability, but just a point of process. The zoning ordinance gives the planning board in sections 9 through 12 criteria for the application, criteria for the approval process, and conditions that can be imposed. So this is the framework under which the planning board would review any project that were proposed. It is not the job of the planning board to review the financial viability of a project. That would come through the select board at the disposition process.
And this is governed by state law. So because the town owns the land, in order to sell the land or to change the use, there has to be a 2/3 vote of town meeting. There's a Supreme Judicial Court case from 1984 that interprets the state statute that way. And so we are not legally allowed to sell the land or lease the land or change the use of the land without a 2/3 vote of town meeting. So it's not in the zoning bylaw. It's a state law that limits our discretion to sell the land.
Okay, thank you. Microphone number 2.
Renee Howley, 3 Harding Street. I guess mine's more of a statement, but there is kind of a question. So
No, actually, a question.
a question, there is a question. So we are already concerned about traffic congestion in schools. So I understand some of our concerns are speculative, but as a project manager at a major medical device firm, I find it hard to understand why we couldn't, knowing what the preferred proposal is of that around 320 homes, estimate what the impact on the town will be, at least from the schools and water and sewer perspective. I understand traffic is a different scenario. I also am curious, with the change from B&I to residential and multi-use, kind of tongue-in-cheek, where are the buses going?
Okay. Well, no.
I worked as an adjunct to the warrant committee for years, looking at the financials, and I did focus on the schools and the cost, the estimated cost for adding students to our schools. Sat down with people in the town administration and the schools and looked at what our current utilization was. So it's not that we don't have any information. We actually used, in the preferred scenario, $4,200 per pupil, but recognizing some people were uncomfortable whether or not that was accurate, and of course we're in this kind of projecting, we're in an early stage, so we took numbers from $3,800 to $5,000 per pupil and evaluated it and put it in the model against the revenues and the other costs, and it didn't cause the town negatives. In fact, the financials came out, they were net positive for the town. Those have been still questioned. So people said, wow, you shouldn't take an incremental cost, you should really look at the average cost per pupil. And again, all of these numbers were based on FY18 because that's when the financials were being evaluated. And in FY18, it was about $15,300 average per pupil cost. Of course, that includes debt and things like that that really don't go up when you add more pupils. But even if you took that number, the financials came out okay. So it's not that it hasn't been looked at, it totally has been looked at. It's been assessed within the range that is realistic, given that this is just a prospective plan. And the plan is very viable with the number of students, with the costs, with a wide range of variation around those costs.
I just want to add that, and the select board can disagree if they choose, although I think I'm on base. It would be fully within the select board's discretion in the land disposition agreement to require upgrades to any municipal facilities that were impacted by a proposed project, including traffic mitigation, additional school funding. Those are the types of things that are commonly in a land disposition agreement resulting from a project.
Microphone number 1.
Yes, with the money we've spent...
If you could just identify yourself, please.
With the money this town has spent in the past 15 years on the memorial school, on the police station, and on the fire station and the town garage, how are we coming up with the $8 million it's probably going to cost to get water, if there is water, for this unit? I think you're putting the cart before the horse.
Okay, so
we
have
have
a question
many questions for you.
Anybody want to address that?
Bill, do you want to talk about water? Bill Harvey's here from the chair of the water.
I asked you the question, where is the $8 million going to come
I think we have
from
the
the
question.
water
We're
if
just
there
trying
is
to get you
water?
the best answer we can.
I'm not aware of an $8 million.
What do you think it will cost?
Well, the town currently has adequate capacity to supply domestic potable water to the town and for the foreseeable future.
We're on every summer, we're on 3 days a week. What do you think's going to happen when that acreage?
Well, the state has water conservation measures that we have in our water permit.
Yeah.
And that's part of our sustainable program, is to make sure we have adequate resources to service all needs. And potable water is something that we feel we've got an adequate supply to supply domestic users.
What if you can't get it? What if it's gone?
Can't hear you if you don't speak into the mic, please.
Pardon?
Can't hear you if you don't speak into the mic.
What if it's gone? What if the water is gone? What if there is none?
Based
what if
on
we can't tap it anymore?
We've had an engineering study done by the Development Committee to look specifically at the projected demand for the conceptual framework that we've developed. And we do not see a capacity problem with the water supply or with the wastewater treatment plant.
Okay. Microphone number 2. We're going to...
Gary Scullin for Alder
Thank
Road.
you.
I just have a question for the Development Committee. Some people do think that this project will lead to a larger development than what we're seeing. Developers may want to change the project scope add additional housing. What assurances are there that this won't happen? And I also have a second question. Could you just touch a little base on the tax credits and how they work?
Okay, so let me take your first question first. I think, everyone that's been involved in the effort since 2014 is keenly aware that they don't want a big project. And a lot of time has been spent trying to identify and make sure there are controls in place that as this project moves forward, that a developer is not given free rein to do whatever they want. There's the traditional town controls, but then there's also the town owns the land. So, the town can lease the land, the town can take the land back. There's other mechanisms that are available to the town to try to address your concern, which I know many people share. And I think we've tried to hit on some of those tonight during the presentations. Yeah, so how can I help you on the tax credits?
Just give it an overview of some sort.
Okay, so the historic tax credit is actually a Department of Interior National Park Service program. And a developer can qualify for credits. There's a process, but it's essentially by right if a project is on the National Register. And so the credits get allocated by the Department of Interior to the project. The developer can then sell those credits to investors so that brings in other people's money for the project. So the assumption here is 63 million. It could be more, it could be less for the state hospital, but that's a source of funds that's not available if we're in a demolition, new construction scenario. And then what the investor gets out of it is that's an offset on their federal income taxes for 5 years. So the reason they have the controls that I touched on earlier is to make sure that they're not in a situation where they get audited by the IRS and there's a recapture of their tax benefits. So one of the reasons that the default rate is so low for these projects is, if you're the developer that's caused John Hancock to have to restate their federal income tax return, this is the last tax credit project you're ever doing. Is that helpful?
It is. Thank you.
Joanna, did you have a comment?
Yes, I just wanted a couple questions have come up on the site control issue, so I just wanted to make sure that everyone understands that what we're doing here is zoning, and in the zoning bylaw, there are controls over how you would get a project approved, which would essentially be the same as, any property in the town that was subject to this zoning would have to go through those controls. This is unique because it's also town-owned land. So the controls that you see in the zoning bylaw only would apply at the project approval point, but the town can also condition and control who buys the property and what terms they're going to put on the sale, which are not reflected in the zoning bylaw.
Okay, thank you. We're going to freeze the questions with the 6 people that are at the microphone, so go back to microphone number 1.
Betsy Jacobson, 7 Kmark Drive, and this question is for the selectmen. In a recent Medfield State Hospital Master Planning Committee newsletter dated October 30th, the statement was to make a limited number of units more attractive to a builder, the town could decide to cover some or all of the estimated $25 million in infrastructure costs for roads, water, sewer, and electricity. So I want to hear from each of the selectmen what their position is on using taxpayer money for infrastructure. Thank you.
I'll start. I'm against it.
I'm not interested in doing that.
True to form, I have a more complex answer for you, Betsy. The point that I have, the bottom line is I'm not in favor of having taxpayers have to provide supplemental funds to make sure a developer makes a profit. So that's the short answer. In thinking about that, the one thing that I have pointed out in some of our meetings is when we bought the property for $3.1 million, we assumed the financial liability for the demolition and remediation of the buildings. The current estimate of that liability is $25 million. If we have a project that involves this, and that number is going to get refined. There's an estimate, so I'm not stuck on that number. If we have an estimate from a developer to absorb part of that liability, and in exchange for that, we had to put money, in other words, if we put money in that was less than what our liability is for fixing those buildings, and we had a proposal, obviously it would make sense for us to look at that because we'd wind up spending less on that than we would taking care of the buildings themselves. So my main point was we may wind up putting money in above the 3.1 million we have put in order to get that liability covered by a developer. It's a straight financial point. I don't think we should subsidize developers.
Microphone number 2.
Hi, my name is Patrina Floody. I'm at 15 Juniper Lane. I've actually got 2 questions. One for the selectmen is, if rezoning doesn't pass tonight, leads right into your comment, what's Plan B and what are the next steps? And then my second question for the warrant committee is, what are the financials if we vote no? And what do we need to consider that's not been addressed today? Thank you.
So to your first question, there is no Plan B at this point. The selectmen have not had a discussion about where we would go next, and I'll give my 2 colleagues a chance to add to this if they'd like to, because now I'm getting into a personal perspective on this. If it doesn't pass tonight, I think the very first thing the selectmen are going to need to understand is what message to take from that not passing. And so first, our job isn't to do things to people. Our job is to try to figure out what the town wants and then figure out the best job we can of getting it consistent with fiscal responsibility and, you know, the overall interests of the town. I think we're going to have to step back and take a look at that and then try to understand what that message is. Based on that, then we have to take a look at what would a Plan B look like. My own guess is that that plan will be a more hard-nosed economic-based plan. My guess is it might be a little less strategic to the extent that this was a 4-year, $500,000 process to get where we are. And it might possibly, from my perspective, involve a more incremental approach. I don't know that it would necessarily be better, but I don't know how to get things digested if we get an unclear message here.
So we really haven't talked about what to do next, so that it's very much an uncertainty. I guess my reaction would be that we're as a town then faced with having a lot of old derelict buildings, and they create a potential for liability, and how do we deal with that in a fiduciary way that protects the town's interest? I'm not quite sure what that means. You know, there's some problems of having those number of buildings that are not going to be moving forward towards some sort of planned reuse.
Yeah, I mean, I think the first thing we'll have to do is develop, there has been a plan in the works from the Buildings and Grounds Committee for the stabilization of the buildings, sort of an investment plan for 5 to 10 years to keep them roughly status quo. So I think the first thing we will do is move that plan forward and come to a conclusion as to what that's going to be as part of our town's capital planning. I think the estimate we think going forward is, you know, $200,000 a year or so for the next 5 to 10 years is probably sufficient to keep the buildings as they are and not deteriorating. And then I think it depends somewhat, to Gus's point, on exactly what the feedback is. If it's clear that people are opposed to any development at all, then we're going to have to come up with a plan that addresses that reality of town meeting. Otherwise, I think there'll be a discussion, and from my perspective, about some incremental approach that we've discussed from time to time. I don't think, and I think one thing we have some consensus on is there will not be another round of master planning, so there will not be another effort to come up with a comprehensive master plan for all the buildings. I don't think we'll be looking at it as a whole site to be revived as a campus, because I don't think the physics and the economics of the site are going to change. And so for the site and what it is, I think the committee has done the best job possible to come up with a reuse plan if you want to keep the campus and the buildings together. And so I do think a no vote, one thing I will take away from it is that keeping the campus is not a priority for the town.
Comments from the Warrant Committee?
So the financials of doing nothing, well, it really depends on, first of all, what the Plan B is. But assuming there is no Plan B and it's status quo, then it's the $200,000 a year of maintenance. At a certain point, these are old buildings, you can't just keep putting in maintenance. So there is a $500,000 to $700,000 cost of so-called mothballing the buildings, which is essentially stabilizing them. John Thompson, I believe, in a few minutes is going to discuss that in more detail and what that would involve. And then ultimately, the estimate right now for demolishing the buildings is $25 million, which would include, environmental remediation, et cetera. That cost hasn't been fine-tuned. It needs a lot more study, but it's a big number.
Thank you so much. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Final four questions.
Mr. Moderator?
Yes.
Over here.
Oh, Randy.
Sorry. I just want to remind, opposite an incremental disposition that was mentioned in passing as an alternate Plan B, that will require a zoning change also. Unless, of course, we make that business industrial under its current zoning.
Okay.
Correct?
Microphone number 1.
Susan Bernstein, 8 Kenny Road. I just have a clarification question. I've heard from some people that they want the town to go slower, only not zone the entire parcel or the entire campus, but concentrate on the most profitable areas. I'm just wondering if you have an idea of whether that's a good or a bad idea, to anybody who can answer. Thank you.
I think that's a good question. From the standpoint of the development committee, we think the town gets the most value out of the site by dealing with the zoning in a comprehensive way. And trying to piecemeal it creates uncertainty for the developers who are going to do, those first pieces and what they might be willing to pay for the rights to develop, with the uncertainty of whether the other phases will actually happen. I would make a distinction between that and passing the zoning comprehensively and then just choosing to do different parcels, because the town certainly has the ability to do that. You could change the zoning but not move forward on the entire project at the same time. You could stage it over many years. Again, with everything being subject to a disposition vote, there would be plenty of latitude for the selectmen and for the voters to decide if the project was going too fast or if it was too much too soon. But I think if you only change the zoning for part of it now, you open up the idea that somebody can cherry pick the best site and underpay for it, because they're going to have the specter of unrenovated, contaminated buildings hanging over their project.
Just a point to add from the planning board's perspective, we clearly support the idea of looking at planning on a more holistic basis and not looking on a parcel by parcel basis. There is also a prohibition under state law against zoning individual parcels at one time. So we do agree that this is something that should be looked at comprehensively.
Should declare these the last 3 questions here, so I'm sorry for those of you who have just come down, but these will be our last 3 questions before we move on to the next phase. Microphone number 2.
I'm Dave Pucci from Charlesdale Road. If the zoning gets approved tonight, how quickly do the RFPs get issued, and what specific boards in town are responsible for the issue and the follow-up on those?
Good question.
Todd, do you want to cover that? You want me to? I'll tell you what I think we're doing, and then you can correct me if you'd like. So the process that we've talked about, and I'm the selectman representative to the development committee, and I'm the least qualified member of the development committee. So those are the guys that know what they're talking about. The process that we've discussed is an RFQ, request for qualifications process, that first would allow us to, that would go out to a large group of people, and from that, the developers, we would down select a set of developers that appear to be the developers that would be most suited for the kind of development we want. So to Todd's earlier presentation, where some developers wanted to take everything down and build everything new, I would anticipate that's not the group we'd be picking. It would be the group of developers that assuming we go down this path, it would be the group of developers that specialize in renovating historic buildings and building them back up to a more modern use. After that down select, there would be a limited number of developers that would be invited to submit proposals through a normal RFP process. I think, Todd, you can correct me on the timing, but the discussion was the RFQ process might take place as early as next spring, and the RFP process would be something probably RFPs going out in the summer. And so getting to some sort of an answer around land disposition at the absolute earliest would be that we'd have a repeat meeting like this a year from now, and based on experience, my bet is it's going to take longer than 12 months. How did you do, Todd?
Yeah, no, I would agree with that, and I want to affirm for people that are here tonight that I think all the committees in town are hearing the kind of feedback and the concerns about what could happen with this site, and take very seriously the responsibility to vet these proposals and try to move in the direction of a plan that would be acceptable to Medfield. You may have seen some mailers, about a 600-unit project or something like that, and I can tell you that's not, nobody is comfortable with that or is comfortable advancing that as something that should be up for a vote. I think we're looking for developers to develop something on the order of the master plan, 300 units, as you read about earlier.
Okay, final two.
And which groups are responsible for issuing and following up on the RFPs, RFQs?
So I think ultimately the answer who's responsible is the Board of Selectmen. We haven't talked about this, but I would anticipate that we'd probably keep the Development Committee running and probably look to them for the technical expertise. There may be some switchover in the committee because some of them, if we get to that point in the process, might have conflicts of interest.
Okay, microphone number 1.
Hi, my name is Ken Whalen. I live at 14 Flintlock. I remember many years ago, we contracted with somebody to investigate the viability of those buildings. I don't remember how many years ago it was, but it was at a point in time when we realized that the state may make those properties available to the town. And the outcome of the investigation was that they were not viable.
Actually,
has
that's
something
not a
changed?
question.
What?
Do you have a question?
Yeah, so has something changed to make those viable?
Okay. Anybody remember the original study? Comments?
I'm not sure which study you're referring to. When I first joined the committee,
It was many years ago.
Our predecessor committee had a study done in 2014 by a company called C3, Commercial Construction
I think it was
Consultants.
earlier than that.
There was another study, I think that was done by, I heard a reference to a study done in 2003. And I never saw the study. The 2014 study referred to it and just had some quotes basically saying they determined the site had been in deteriorated condition because there was deferred and delayed maintenance for anywhere from 10 to 40 years on the building. Opposite your second question, what's changed? I think we need to all understand the central tenet of and foundation of historic tax credits, because without historic tax credits, these buildings are not viable via commercial refurbishment into current code. But the tax credits make it possible, and that's what allowed us as a master planning committee to find that nice, small, sweet spot where we got housing diversity and we got support from the federal government so that we didn't burden the local taxpayers for this development. And it comes with conditions. Todd pointed out some of them. Architecturally, they're very, very stringent, but the good news, as Todd pointed out in his comments, the National Park Service, which administers the historical tax credits at the federal level, is very predictable. They have criteria. If you submit a plan that meets their criteria, you get your tax credits. But it's a financial game changer for us to utilize historic tax credits. Otherwise, we couldn't save those buildings up there. It's just not possible. That's to the point you were making. That was what the report told us.
Okay. I have one other question, please.
You have to.
Oh,
yes, say
Mr.
Mother May
Moderator,
I.
I have one other question.
Go ahead,
But
quickly.
it's really to him.
Okay, yes.
What were the two real estate developers that you approached? Can you reveal that, or is that?
Yeah, so there were more than two. We did a larger mailing. We had responses from Flatley and Associates, from Pulte Homes, from Wind Development, from Beacon Communities, and from Trinity Financial.
Thank you.
And, we were pleased that they were willing to sit and meet with us and give us some free advice.
And lastly, let me say...
No, thank you. But last question, microphone number 2.
Can I say one statement, though? I want to just thank you for your work, what you guys have done. Obviously, you spent a lot of time and diligence, so I appreciate that.
Okay, thank you. Microphone number 2.
My name is Neil Sanders, 26 Pine Street. When Ms. Hulbert mentioned the $25 million number in her presentation, it was very large, very round, and very scary. My question is trying to, how do you square that the town would be, that we would all be on the hook for the $25 million if nothing goes forward with this? And I think that would be a fair statement. With the developers saying, well, we would simply go ahead and level it and build fresh. What happened to that $25 million if they are doing that? And also, is this a squishy number? Has it been vetted? And how long does it take to turn it into a real number?
So the current number is undergoing further review, I believe, by Todd's committee. It's an estimate. It's certainly not a hard number. So there's certainly a degree of variability there. In terms of, if a developer was going to tear down all the buildings and rebuild, I think it would cost the same for them. In terms of why the town would need to do that, if we hold on to the property and do nothing, at some point, something has to be done with the buildings. They won't last forever. And it's a liability. There's, they're sitting there and they are deteriorating. So something would eventually have to be done.
So if I can just maybe clarify my earlier remarks. So the firms that would want to clear the site would pay that cost themselves. And the trade-off to the town is a much larger project because to be profitable for them, they're building on the order of 500 plus units. The historic tax credit developers would remediate those buildings and restore them architecturally, remove the hazardous materials, and those buildings would be reused as part of the new campus redevelopment.
Great. Thank you for the information.
Okay. Well, thank you all. Thank you. Yeah. Just like to welcome and say hello to all our neighbors in the cafeteria. We have a very full overflow room in there, so when it comes to doing our vote, that may have some consequence, but I wanted to welcome them and say hello to them. Okay, the next phase of our dialogue here tonight is to allow opponents and proponents to be able to speak to the town meeting. I have provided, as a matter of my discretion, the opportunity to have two opponents begin by doing a presentation that would mirror the amount of time that was taken by the Medfield State Hospital Development Committee and the Medfield State Hospital Planning Committee. So I'd ask Bill Mazzaro and John Thompson, please, to approach the microphone.
So thank you, Mr. Moderator, and I want to thank all of you who came here tonight. This is an important moment in the history of the town, and whatever side you're on, I'm glad you're here to cast your vote. So my name is Bill Mazzaro, 36 Evergreen Way, and my wife Cindy and I have been abutters of the hospital for 43 years. And for the past 10 years, I've tried to get involved with every town issue or action related to the Farmer State Hospital. This is probably only the second time in those 10 years that instead of standing up here and asking for money from you to do something up at the hospital, I'm here trying to save you spending some money on what's being planned for the hospital. So before I talk about the issues and concerns with tonight's proposed rezoning, I wanted to start and I thought you might find it interesting to get a condensed history of the town's attempt to deal with the long-threatened hospital closing that finally happened in 2003. I'm not going to discuss, next chart, please, John. I'm not going to discuss every bullet there, and I expected a round of applause when I said I wasn't going to do that, but yay, all right, thank you. But I think it bears at least some knowledge, and my passing some knowledge on to you about what a strange world this is and how we seem to have come full circle. In 1981, my Harding Estates neighborhood sponsored a Warren article that changed the zoning of the core campus from agricultural to business industrial. And the hope was that when the hospital closed, with all of the new startups that were around, the state might consider marketing the property as a technology center. And this was certainly preferable to what we were told they were looking to market it as, which was a site for one of the new prisons that they said they needed. Yeah, that's a nice thought, right? So the hospital closed in 2003, and we didn't get a prison, but we didn't get a technology center either. So in 2005, the hospital property was transferred from the Department of Mental Health to DCAM, the Division of Capital Asset Management and Maintenance. And DCAM was selling off the former hospitals in Danvers and Lexington, and what they were really looking for was residential development and residential developers to buy the property. Now, Medfield tried to buy the property rather than see the state put control of it into the hands of a developer, but DCAM said no. So DCAM then reminded the town that because it had not met the 10% affordable housing requirement, under 40B, a development with as many as 20 units per acre was allowed. So you get to do the math on this. So here's the Board of Selectmen in the town faced with a not so subtle threat of 1,600 units. Not surprisingly, the town accepted DCAM's friendly 440-unit 40B on the campus. In 2008, DCAM was ready to go out for developer proposals, but first they had to clean up the hazardous waste sites on the property. And after they cleaned up the waste sites, they needed to rezone. They needed to rezone from business industrial because developers wouldn't submit proposals without the new zoning already being in place. Does that sound familiar? So 4 years later, after John and I reached a mediated settlement agreement with DCAM for the cleanup in the Charles River, and getting them, by the way, to construct the overlook that I'm sure many of you have enjoyed. Thank you. So we had a very nice relationship with DCAM at that time, and the town asked if they would entertain the idea of selling to us, and DCAM agreed to sell. So in November of 2014, SHAC, that's the MSH Purchase Committee, presented their recommendations to buy the property at town meeting. It included a scenario of 200 to 250 rental units, specifically to satisfy the town's remaining 40B requirement. So after 116 years, the town finally took possession of the property and had control of its destiny. In 2018, after 4 years of hard work and with the best of intentions, the MSH Master Plan Committee presented the preferred 334-unit mixed-use residential commercial redevelopment plan. Now, with tonight's warrant article, the selectmen are asking residents to rezone the property from business industrial so that developers will submit proposals on the property. So the BOS has taken on the role originally played by DCAM. So I find that kind of ironic. So the state owned the property for 100 years. DCAM had responsibility for 10 years. The Board of Selectmen tried to buy the property for almost 14 years, and because they didn't want a developer to have control of it. And now, after only owning the property for 5 years, for a project we don't need now and which will change the character of Medfield forever, they want to sell the property. Now, if you go on to page 3, John, please. All right. So I just want to say the master plan clearly, in the preferred scenario, describes the biggest project in Medfield since the construction of the hospital in 1898. The extensive media campaign supporting rezoning repeatedly assures residents that the vote is for rezoning the Medfield State Hospital. It is not a vote for a specific project or plan. And you've heard that tonight in some of the statements made by the people sitting at the table up here. You're not voting on the plan. Well, I would call your attention to the message from the Board of Selectmen in the yellow book that you all received in the mail. It says, the master plan and its preferred scenario reflected the overall will of the town for how the property should be developed. It says, tonight's rezoning vote is your chance to confirm that the master plan reflects what you, the residents of this town, would like to see the town do to develop the property. It says they're giving you the chance with your yes vote to confirm that the master plan reflects what you would like the town to do. Well, I would say tonight's meeting also gives you the chance with a no vote to confirm that the master plan reflects the development you don't want to see. Okay. So anyway, back one. Thank you. So the handout that you were offered tonight when you walked in lists many of the things that I've heard from you as we started this discussion about what should happen at the hospital. It's basically a summary of why I think many residents want to say no. The next page. So I want to point out the plan does not reflect the residents' preference. The preferred scenario is 334 residential units, clearly doesn't reflect, it is not reflected in the surveys that the Master Planning Committee received. And I would point out that in their survey number 1 in July of 2015, housing was listed as their #1 nightmare. Now, not only is it a nightmare, but there are risks with this nightmare. Commercial use is overstated, which will result in more housing units. And why do I say that? The town has market surveys saying that the scenario's commercial space allocation of 191,000 square feet, go to the next page, please, which is 29% of the total development, can't be filled. The language in the master plan even admits this. It says that the preferred scenario ratio of commercial space is 7 times higher than the current ratio in Medfield. And it's more than 1.5 times higher than the ratio in Massachusetts. And you should also know that back when DCAM was proposing to build the 440 units, they had 28,000 square feet of commercial space, or 4%. And the person at the town, the firm that the town hired to review that proposal, said that the 28,000 square feet was too high. And we're looking at 191,000 square feet. All right, so when this unmarketable commercial space fills with more residential units, the number of residents, next page, there you go. The number of residents, number of students, and all of the associated impacts on the town will increase. Water use and sewage will increase. Traffic will increase. Next page. All right, page 7, yeah. Okay, other impacts from the overstatement of the commercial use that will result in more residential units gives us an impact of 1,500 new residents, new students, 48. I want to talk about the students for a moment. The master plan states that the incremental cost that was used for the students was based on us having excess capacity of 300 units. Now, I don't claim to understand how the schools work, but I looked at the Department of Education forecasts, and they're projecting that in 5 years we'll have picked up 290 new students. That's 99% of the 300. Now, I'm not saying that fills the capacity. I'm not smart enough to know, and I'm not smart enough to look into all of the classrooms and see how many students go in each class, whether they're all going into the 3rd grade or whether they're all going into high school. But all I can go by is if 300 is a magic number, we're hitting 290 of those in the next 5 years. All right, so the last page, this is it? Okay, so Other issues and concerns. With projects currently underway or in final permitting stages, the town does not need the 300 units to meet 40B. We will have met this before the property is even sold. The town does not need these units to meet its annual new household demand. This is 220 units, and they're being satisfied by turnover. And the town most certainly does not need the risk of 500 units when the commercial space is not filled. And the town, by the way, gets zero proceeds from the sale of this property. And the town certainly needs the proceeds it could get from the sale of the most marketable property alongside Hospital Road and the recovery of some of John's maintenance costs, and maybe we might get some of the consultant fees back. That would be nice. So residents should not have to lose their current access to the property. The town should not be in such a rush to give the property up, especially since it waited so long and tried so hard to finally get control. And with a potential 10% increase in the population of the town, a 10% increase in student enrollment, perhaps we should call this, excuse me, Randy, the bloat vote. Thank you. I'm going to turn this over to John.
Hey, John, just a note, you have 3 minutes of this allocated time left.
Okay, thank you. I'm John Thompson, 406 Main Street. I'm the current chairman of the Buildings and Grounds Committee, and I have been chairman of Buildings and Grounds this is my 5th year in December. I've dedicated my life to environmental cleanup and management of the environment. I was on the trustees of the Upper Charles Conservation Land Trust. I have a master's degree in hydrogeology and glacial geology. Then I've filled many roles in the town as a volunteer to the benefit of this beautiful town. And in all of my work throughout Massachusetts, I've come to realize and understand when a piece of property is particularly special. This piece of property was chosen in 1892 by the state because it was the most beautiful piece of property that they could find to care for our most fragile citizens. It was the parents and grandparents of the immigrants to the United States that needed a special place to recuperate. The hospital was created as a form of what's called moral treatment. Moral treatment is fresh air and sunshine is healthy for people. This piece of land is incredibly important as a landscape, and it pains me to think of condominiums and houses on it. Having said that, I understand that development may be inevitable, but in making that decision, think carefully. The next time I go to England and Ireland, I'm going to go look at castles, but I'm not going to go look at condos and apartments. This is an incredibly beautiful piece of land. It's rare because it's the top of a hill and it's flat, and it's incredibly healthy, and people from not only Medfield make use of this property. So do we need and want 300 to 500 units of housing on this incredibly special piece of land, or can we take our time to do that? I had a question about the additional capacity for water supply. While I've heard that we have enough for the foreseeable future, in my business, the foreseeable future is defined as 7 years in terms of cleaning up the environment. And basically our water is, think of it, a water tower as a glass of water. The more people that drink from that glass, the less water is available. In the summertime, I think that something like 90% of our water is derived from one of our wells. That's well number 6 in the Charles River Valley. That's it. Well number 6 derives its water from the aquifer that's connected to the Charles River. So in taking more water out, you lower the water table and you effectively have an impact on the river. Consider that. And if there is a number of residents that we should not exceed, we should know what that number is. We should know the number of people that our water supplies will support. And that, I have the same question with wastewater capacity. We should know the number of that our wastewater plant can handle. Maybe there is capacity, but there is a number there that we should know. We don't know that yet. The development committee focused externally, not internally. And internally is asking questions about our own town and how our town can meet the demands of a new development.
Okay, John?
Yes.
I need you to wind up.
Okay. I'll wind up now by saying that we need to consider traffic concerns. I live on Main Street. When I first came to town, there was no traffic jam in front of my house. Today it starts at 2 o'clock. Can our schools handle this capacity? I would prefer to develop the front and move on. The buildings are not falling down. I've been in every building from the basement to the attic, and I will gladly take people in and show them attics if they want to see the 60-foot spans of Douglas fir that are 12 by 12, or take a walk at the hospital,
Okay,
look at the
thank you
roof
very
line.
much. I'm going to have to stop that.
Okay.
Okay, appreciate that. Thank you. Comments? Okay, we will take, if you want to speak as a proponent at microphone number 2, as an opponent at microphone number 1, so an opponent at microphone number 1, as a proponent to microphone number 2. If you intend to speak, you might want to line up so that we can gauge some measure of the proponents and the opponents, and I'm able to determine how much time we would like to provide. We'll start with 2 minutes, okay? Microphone number 2.
This might take a little bit longer than 2 minutes, but...
Well, you have 2 minutes.
Yeah,
and
some
then
of it
we'll move
is...
to then we'll move to the other microphone.
Okay, you can cut me off then.
I will do that.
So, Michael Taylor, 240 North Street. I also chair the Medfield Historic District Commission, which has design review, including demolition authority, over the 4 historic districts in town, including the Hospital Farm Historic District. We're part of the inner wall that Randy referred to in his moat analogy. Our primary focus is to save the 23 Queen Anne-style buildings in the central core campus built between 1896 and 1897. We are very encouraged the master plan would preserve not only these 23 buildings, but 5 more, including East and West Halls in the 1906 Training Academy. This is in contrast to the earlier plans that assumed many of these buildings were in poor shape, would have to be torn down. An earlier gentleman mentioned, what was that study? It was a study done by DCAM about 15, 16 years ago. It was called Lozano Baskin Associate Report. At the time, they said 7 of the buildings were, I'm talking about in the central core, were in fair condition, including the Lee Chapel, 2 fair to poor, and 14 poor, of which 3 would likely have to be torn down. So anyway, it now appears that because of the federal and state tax credits up to 40%, it is feasible to save most, if not all, of these buildings. We also believe that postponing the development would make it difficult for the Cultural Alliance to raise the money to preserve the Lee Chapel Infirmary, and an $8 to $10 million cost a developer would otherwise have to pay. Some are advocating we first develop the former College Triangle, the Arboretum area near the southeast corner of the property, and use this money to stabilize the other historic buildings. However, this presumes the 6 historically contributing cottages built between 1907 and 1914, and the 7th house, the Harding Bishop House that Richard DeSorger thinks we should be saving, which dates back to the 1700s, would be demolished to make room for single-family duplexes. This is unlikely to occur because the town agreed to encourage historic preservation, and agreed that they wouldn't tear the buildings down unless there wasn't any feasible, acceptable proposal. So if the cottages go first, they will likely have to be saved at additional costs to the developer and less money to the town.
Okay, well, thank you very much. Microphone number 1.
Tracy Hogan, 20 Hospital Road. I'm encouraging people to vote no on this. One of the main reasons is after all the meetings that we had on the development of the hospital, one of the main things that people said is they wanted land preservation. With this vote, it will take the north field and the green space, and it will make it so it can be developed under special permit. Right now, they cannot be developed, but it will change that, and it will be able to be developed under special permits. So there is 0 land preservation in this bill. Also, the hospital is already generating $150,000 last year alone on movies. We get money from the car show. We can go ahead and develop the Arts Center now. It is already zoned building. The permitting has already been accepted from what I have heard. That can go ahead, and that can be our Plan B. As far as housing, we are at our limit right now. We are at our 10%. We are in the safe zone. If we add 300 units of housing, that is going to increase the inventory of housing in the town, which will in turn increase the 10%. So if you vote on the approval today, you are also voting on further development, because further development will have to happen because we will go out of our safe harbor. The 10% will have to be raised, and that will promote more development. And we're going to get a situation like they're having in Walpole now, where more development creates more development upon more development. The 40B laws currently favor developers. The only say that we have in order to stop this is we say where we do not want the development to happen. That is the only power that we have as a town, because as soon as this passes, developers can come in. As long as they're dotting their I's and crossing their T's, they will get approval. There are other small towns surrounding us, like Dover and Sherburne, who are also buying up land, but they are not subjecting it to development. They're buying up land to preserve it for their towns.
Thank you. Microphone number 2.
Jerry Potts, 7 Kirk Street. Can I ask a clarification that doesn't count, because there were a couple things said there that don't match what's in here. So my understanding is the green and the north field, and I'm looking down unless I'm doing something totally wrong, is that there is no residential allowed there. There's no special permit, it just says no. Is that correct? Because I certainly wouldn't support it if the green and the north field, at least the 3 years of meetings I've attended. So can someone validate that? Because that's a big statement to make, and if it's incorrect, can someone clarify that?
Yep.
And that doesn't count towards my 2 minutes.
Who's running this meeting?
Please. I meant please.
Sherry, you said the Northfield, what was the other you were asking?
The green.
The green, okay. So in the Northfield, residential uses are not permitted. The uses are open space, recreational, and the only use permitted by special permit other than recreational was a art center. And then in the green, open space, art center by special permit, passive recreational, education museum, and parking were the only uses. Well, there's also design guidelines Teresa wanted to point out in terms of how any development in that district would be constructed, but it does not include residential uses. And while I'm here, just a quick point of clarification, the new housing units that would be proposed at the state hospital would themselves require a minimum of 15 to 25% affordable housing. The state requirement is 10%. So not only would those units not put us behind our current 40B requirement, but they would advance us in our 40B count for the rest of the town because they're in excess of 10%.
Thank you. Jerry, take another minute.
Okay. So there are a couple things. So I had the opportunity to attend the planning meetings for the 3 years. I wasn't on the committee. I was just interested in it. And one of the things that I think is important, there's been a lot of noise and actually, candidly, some scare techniques about the size of this. And I think it's important that folks know in this town that the first consultant who proposed to this committee was VHB. And they came back with high density, really high density, and oh my God density. And they were dismissed by this committee because it didn't fit the town. So while I think 1,500 is crazy, first of all, I don't think it can happen unless we come back here in a year and vote it. But number two, this committee has reflected what this town said. And they've done a fantastic job of reaching out to us. And I think the proof is that they got rid of VHB and went to McCabe, who came back with a plan that actually does reflect what all of you said in many open forums. So that's number one. Number two, just quick math. $25 million to remediate the buildings and $65 million in losing historic tax credits. Do that math. $65 million that we lose, because if you start tearing down the buildings, you lose that $65 million totally. You lose the buildings, the history, everything that's up there that makes that a beautiful campus, and you have $25 million in remediation. That's the actual number we're giving up by not supporting this zoning. Thank you.
Microphone number 1.
Tracy Murphy, 165 Harding Street. I moved here 28 years ago from Dover with my husband at the time, who has been deceased for 20 years now. Over the years, when I first came here, my taxes were about $1,800. Now they're $8,900. The prices keep going up, and it's the cost of living in a great town, but you're pricing certain people right out of the town who've been here, completely out of the town. I want to stay here. I moved here because it was a rural town. It was like Dover. And now, as someone alluded to before, Dover's buying the property, not developing it. We're here developing it. You say 314 units, maybe up to 500, but you can't give an estimate of what the traffic study is. I think you would have proposed or shown a proposal on what the increase in traffic, the increase in the cost of the schools, et cetera. I live on 165 Harding Street, as I said, between the hours of 7:15 in the morning to 7:40. I cannot even get out of my driveway right now. It is backed up. I try to go left, you go right, and it's sitting there. You add 314 housings, who knows what is going to be the traffic on that road. Trying to get out onto 27, it's the same way. Just wanted to make my point on that. Thank you for your time.
Thank you. Microphone number 2.
Good evening, I'm Tamara Small, 9 Kenny Road. I also serve as the CEO of NAOP Massachusetts, the Commercial Real Estate Development Association. NAOP represents the interests of those who own, manage, develop, or invest in commercial properties, including retail, mixed-use, multifamily, and lab space throughout the Commonwealth. Back when this came up for a vote to purchase the State Hospital campus in 2014, I was one of the few people who voted against it. I was concerned that this site was far too challenging for the town to take on. I was concerned that it would be an unnecessary burden on the taxpayers of Medfield for an unknown amount of time. And most importantly, I was deeply concerned that people were voting to purchase the state hospital in order to block any future development or reuse of that site. I sincerely hope that the voters of Medfield tonight prove me wrong. It's time that the market be allowed to respond to that site and we open it up and we allow this rezoning to move forward. Again, we are not voting on a specific development proposal. When that time comes where a development proposal is put forward, we will have the Board of Selectmen and community members will have extensive input and a 2/3 vote will be required. If we do nothing and we vote no, the cost to maintain that site will only increase. Our liability will increase and the marketability of that site will decrease. For these reasons, I encourage all of you to vote yes this evening. Thank you.
Thank you. Microphone number 1.
Renee Howley, 3 Harding Street. First of all, I forgot to say earlier, I want to thank the committees for all the work you did. My disagreement is by no means any disrespect to all of you. I had the pleasure of meeting with 2 of you last week, and we had a wonderful conversation, and I truly appreciate that. However, I live at 3 Harding Street. My children want to ride their bikes to school. They cannot get out of my driveway today. The amount of traffic this is going to flow onto Harding Street to get to North Street, to go through Dover, is just crazy. If you think about it, what's already been being built up on Hospital Road is not at capacity. They're not full. My kids, they're in 6th and 7th grade. They want to ride their bikes to school. They can't because I can't trust them to get home safely in the afternoon already. So without the understanding the infrastructure and the traffic that this is going to cause and what the town is going to do about it, I cannot vote yes for this. I also want to clarify something Mr. Potts was saying. Just so everyone's clear, those tax credits do not go to the town. They go to the developers. It does not come to us.
Thank you. Microphone number 2.
Former Selectman Mark Fisher, Kenny Road, Medfield. I served on the Board of Selectmen in 2014 when we signed the land disposition agreement and bought the property. I was on it with Pete Peterson and Richard DeSorga. It was quite a momentous night, pretty scary. We really were taking on a big thing, as you can tell with everyone here in their comments. It's a big hurdle. It's a big, really a big project, and we got a lot to think about going forward. But Based upon my experience and talking with everyone, I really feel you've got to place your faith in your elected officials and all of your committee people, the volunteer committee people. Trust their judgment. They're all looking to try to do the best thing for all of the residents of Medfield. And we're moving in the right process. We're taking a very methodical step-by-step approach. And I really think it's very, very important to vote yes tonight so we can continue this process moving forward. Have faith, please do. Thank you.
Thank you. Microphone number 1.
Joseph Trudeau from 140 High Street, Medfield. How you doing? I work many jobs. One of my jobs, I've been involved in negotiations with the government and also with the Teamsters. And what I see here is two parties that are very close but far apart. And this is my shining city on the hill. I moved out here 36 years ago, seen a lot of changes. I think you guys have done a great job. This is the first time I've ever come to a meeting, but I think it's that important. What I see is good things, but what I see is too much. We owe it to our children, to our grandchildren, to our great-grandchildren. This town's been here for 300 years or so. We have an untouched piece of land up there that has to be worked on with some of these older buildings. We realize that. We have to step back, work together. I think it's just a little too big. I would like to see more open space. I'd like to see these buildings revented over, taken care of, everything that you guys are doing, but come back, make it a little smaller. Remember, we won't be here in 100 years, none of us. But our children, our grandchildren will be. We want to leave a legacy for our children, our grandchildren. And we want to make sure we do this right. This vote tonight is on the right track, but everybody has to get together. We have to downsize it just a bit to make sure that we have open land for our children, make sure these buildings are taken care of, and everything is in order. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, the folks before us will be the final folks to have 2 minutes to comment. Microphone number 2.
Laurel Scotty, 10 Green Street. What do we really know? We are not in, we're currently in safe harbor for 40B, but we have not reached our 10%. With the development that'll go up, when it does at the hospital site, that will add to the diversity. The maintenance costs. At the end of 2015, we had already spent in excess of $1.2 million on this property. The movies have only supplied us with $300,000 to cover that. Going forward, we'll get more money from the movies, hopefully, but we're still going to be paying $200,000 a year, possibly for 5 years. That's another $1 million down the drain with nothing to show for it. Water. Did we have any restrictions this past summer? No. The town does have an issue with not being able to account for a percentage of its water usage, but that is being addressed. But that does not include the irrigation systems which water lawns during the raining storms. Population, the postcard prediction, I don't have a crystal ball. We are voting on a zoning amendment, but let's look at history. Medfield's population increased by 3,800 residents between 1960 and 1970. This was a time when the Belknap Estates, which is in the Nebo area, and the Marlin Estates, the Harding Road area, were built. Some of the young people who moved into town at that time are older now and objecting to the neighboring site of MSH being developed. What happened to Medfield after that influx of population? Look around, we have a lovely town, a town created by change. Traffic, same crystal ball, but remember, the current BI zoning allows for school buses to be parked there, campers, trailers, boats, trucks. That will be your traffic. The proposed zoning amendment is the result of 4 years of work, an additional year of input from a development committee. We were all asked to give our input of what we wanted. This is not an impulsive vote. We have been waiting the chance for 5 years to vote, and I vote yes.
Microphone number 1.
Thank you, Mr. Moderator. John Harney. And since Mark said he was a former selectman, I too have been a former selectman. I am a former selectman, and I was former to Mark's being a selectman. So I'm an old timer in town. I've seen 55 years here now. And I have seen developments come and go, developers come and go, and some developers go partway through their development. So we shouldn't be at all certain as to what will happen there, even once the developer who responds to the RFP is accorded the development by the Board of Selectmen at the time. It may not be totally this Board of Selectmen. We have an election every March. And the board's turn. I thought it was time to get out, and I had 2 terms there. And I want the meeting to know that this is really a mechanism tonight by the Board of Selectmen to get hold of the authority to dispose of the property. Now, it's not on the particular plan, as we've heard earlier tonight. It's on a plan that the Board of Selectmen, will decide to bring to this meeting for a special meeting probably, to vote yes or no. But the whole plan is worked by the Board of Selectmen beforehand. We know at least 2 of the selectmen. Mr. McCucci's position is much more nuanced, but Mr. Peterson has for years thought that housing could become Medfield's business. Mr. Murphy is first term on the board, but he is very, very fervent about pushing development on that property. Development on that property is going to cost this town in the millions of dollars. Millions of dollars. And some of that is right in the plan that you can read, where McCabe Associates says that the town has to look to pick up, I believe it was $200,000 to $500,000 for several years in the planning period of the exercise of getting a development up there. So that is really counter to what John Thompson's operation does up there, and this town truly owes John Thompson and Bill Massaro a terrific sense of gratitude for all they have done.
Thank you very much. Microphone number 2.
Hi, Maureen Lipsitz, 7 Kenny Road. I heard the argument that there's too much commercial space, and if a developer can't fill that space, it will become residential units. Can you explain why that is or isn't true?
I didn't hear who the question was directed to. I'm sorry.
It was explained that we have too much commercial space, and that developers said that can't be developed, and if it's not developed as commercial, it would be residential. And is that a true statement or false?
Please.
I'm Gil Rogers, also on the Master Planning Committee. First of all, in terms of numbers, like the amount of commercial space, we don't know, right? That's just, it's an assumption, but it's nothing that we really know. And we won't know that until we get some viable proposals back. The second point is that when we did the plan, there are 2 properties, or there are 2 uses that we put in the plan. One, which we think are interesting ideas. One was for a small hospitality inn on the west side of the campus. And the other is a skilled nursing center. It was on the east side of the campus. So that changes, that's included in the numbers. I had a chance to run a Catalyst committee in which we went out and looked at other possible commercial uses, retirement centers, nursing centers, different types of sports activities, and we found quite a bit of interest in commercial space for the property. So the idea that there wouldn't be any use for it, that is just not true. To give you an example, I also studied other hospitals like Foxborough, Northampton. Give you an idea, Foxborough has 100,000 square feet of commercial space and another 50,000 feet of retail space. So the numbers that you hear are not out of line at all. Northampton had between 200 and 300,000 square feet in their plan. But I think that the key point that I'd like to make is that commercial space is diverse. So it's not one type of use. It's not just an office complex, for example. It gives a variety of uses, farm to table, retirement centers, other types of things. The buildings may all not be used. Some may be not viable for reuse. The developers who use historical tax credits also are bound, as Todd talked, by a number of constraints and regulations such that they have to abide by the rules of historical tax credits, for example. So it's not like they can just convert commercial space into houses. There's constraints. And since they're borrowing money from the market, from the historical tax credit market, which is a very robust market in Massachusetts, they have obligations to these lenders such that they can't just willy-nilly change it. So, and again, I think that the bottom line, though, is we should not take these numbers that we've seen and try to extrapolate some implication to it. We need to get it out to the real world to get realistic sets of numbers.
Thank you very much. Microphone number 1.
Please stand up. Good evening, Richard Callahan, 16 Maplewood Road in Medfield. Just wanted to share something with you, John, if you can stand up, please. A few years ago, John Harney and Bill Massaro were honored by the Charles River Watershed Association for their Citizen Activist Award and their involvement with the remediation of Medfield State Hospital property. Per Charles River Watershed Association, members Elise LeDuc and Rita Barron, the dedication and commitment of these two men and demanding a full cleanup has been the driving force as we work together to persuade the Division of Capital Asset Management, the property owner, to remove rather than partially cap contamination and the dump adjacent to the Charles River. Please do not discount what these two gentlemen are saying. If it wasn't for their efforts, we wouldn't be here tonight. So please do not discount. Thank you. A few other bullet points I'd like to cite. There's been a lot of, unfortunately, I work in investments. I've been in the field for 28 years. There's a lot of hyperbole about this and that, what's going to happen with the market economy, assets, so forth. There's been a lot of words about the stability of the buildings. Has anybody been in the North End? Okay, the South End. We talked, and John Thompson, I want to include your efforts as well, excuse me, with Bill and John. Okay, these buildings have been constantly doomed. These buildings are fine. I believe John, his efforts, he knows more about these buildings than most other people. Secondly, we talk about inclusion, diversity. Look, we came here, my wife, my family, to live in Medfield for the characteristics of the town. We did not want to live in Waltham. Okay? No disrespect to Waltham. Different complexion, different characteristics. So please keep that in mind, okay? We are voting on things that may change. And if anybody's offended, I don't mean to offend anybody, but please keep that in mind because like an investment, there's a lot of positive things that are being said tonight. It gives me concern about things that may not work out. There's a lot of benefit. I'm a little bit concerned about the risks. Okay, the town has a lot going on right now. We have an issue with Rose Bay that may be built. We have an issue with Meadows on Dale Street. There's also another project going on at the American Legion. And eventually, we're going to have a school that needs to be built.
Thank you.
Which could be an $80 million project. Please keep that in mind. I'd rather, lastly, if I may, I tell people I'd rather walk
Martha
microphone
Festa,
number 2.
16 Quail Run. And I'd like to preface my statements by saying I also appreciate and respect all that John Thompson's done, Bill Massaro, John Harney have done amazing things for this town and this property. And I respectfully disagree with them on this one, but I really appreciate what they've done. I attended the Master Planning Committee meetings for 3 years, first as a Warrant Committee member, and then as an advisor to the Warrant Committee. And throughout the process, I've strived to be objective. I challenged the master plan and financials. I sought input from folks on both sides of this issue, and I strive to help people make informed decisions. There's a lot of focus on the financial for the preferred plan because we shouldn't move forward if we can't expect a proposed plan that's good for the town. Due diligence has been done to re-examine the financials every time a new concern was raised. The details of the assumptions and results were reviewed with anyone interested in understanding the details, and there's a lot of details. Unfortunately, some of the opponents of rezoning were unable to make time for the detailed review, and then they kind of worked their numbers on their own. But anyway, anyone who did look at the numbers in detail, including warrant committee members, current town administration, and neighbors with financial backgrounds, walked away in agreement. The preferred plan is highly likely to provide positive cash flow to mitigate future tax increases. That would reduce your taxes, and highly likely to be better for the town than any option requiring Medfield to pay for building demolition. Now, I'm not promising your taxes will go down. That's just the preferred plan. Financial viability has been demonstrated, but once we rezone, we'll get proposals that are likely different from the preferred plan. With detailed proposals, a more precise analysis can be run, and we can decide if the plan is a good fit for our town. If the Board of Selectmen or town meeting don't like the proposals, we'll be no further ahead than we are now, but we won't be left wondering if we've missed an opportunity for Medfield. Some have worried that development will overwhelm the schools or our water and sewer capacity. Reasonable questions. The relevant town boards and officials agreed that the assumptions in the preferred plan are reasonable, especially since they're tested over a very wide range of possible values. But cost and capacity will need to be re-examined once we have a real proposal. Some proposed that we mothball the buildings and maintain the grounds until we find a better plan. This siphons funds away from other town needs, and if we're unwilling to ask for a developer proposal now, after years of volunteer time and consultant expense, why would we think we can come up with a better plan in the future? Eventually, someone must pay to restore or demolish those buildings. If we don't allow a developer to do it, Medfield taxpayers will have to.
Thank you. Microphone number 1.
Hi, I'm Laura Walsh, 108 Harding Street. I moved here about 5 years ago. I'm not going to complain about the horrible, horrible traffic on Harding Street because I knew it when I moved in. I do have concerns about that this would increase that more. My main concern, though, is I've heard a lot about money, I've heard a lot about finances, and I've heard a lot of scare tactics. But what drew me to this town, and I think what draws a lot of people, are the small town character. You drive down Main Street, you see the gazebo, you see beautiful homes. You go on the internet and you look at the school systems and you realize it's an excellent one, and I think that's why a lot of people move here. My concern is student-teacher ratios are not what they were when I moved here even 5 years ago, and what's going to happen. We've talked about cost per student, but we haven't talked about quality of education and quality of life, and I feel like a yes vote is opening the door to developers who are willing to evidently really bend over backwards for. We want to make sure that they know everything's zoned and prepped for them. They're going to get every parcel because, gosh, we don't want to make them think that they may only get part of the job. So maybe we need to talk to different developers and find there's got to be somebody out there who is willing to look at this as a passion project and to help the future of a town and not just walk away with a whole pile of money like the ones that I see doing now. Thank you.
Okay, microphone number 2.
Good evening. My name is Nancy Sterling. I live at 21 Hospital Road. I've gone to as many meetings and briefings as I can. I've read the arguments on both sides. I'm an abutter who enjoys the property, but I would like to see it preserved in a manner which takes into account historic preservation and open space, and I think this master plan does that. I believe that, of course, the selectmen have organized all of this. That's why we elected them. The vote on zoning is absolutely the right thing. It's the way to go in order to attract quality developers who have historical experience. If you do a piecemeal approach, you will not attract those kinds of developers. And sadly, there are not developers who are in it for the fun of it or for enjoyment. They're in it to make a profit. We know that. But we want developers who also have historic preservation experience and credit. That's who we should be going for. We want sidewalks with our kids to be able to bike and walk to school. Who's going to put in those sidewalks without using taxpayer money? The answer is developers as part of their mitigation credits. If we don't move forward tonight with the very first step to rezone, this beautiful property will continue to deteriorate. Folks who know much more about the status of these buildings than I have spoken, but we're not using those buildings. They could be a cultural center. They could be a hub for this community. So even if they are in great shape, they're going to continue to deteriorate if we don't do something. This could be a vibrant new Medfield community within a community that will add to the character of this town and preserve historic sites and buildings. One last thing. We live on Hospital Road, half a mile from the gate. I will happily put up with additional traffic to make this project move forward. I strongly urge a yes vote.
Thank you. Microphone number 1.
Hi, Ian Simone, 5 Rhododendron Avenue. So I feel like the formula for the common good of this community is small, quaint, and underdeveloped. And I feel like this goes against the grain of that formula that we have in this community. We don't really need to gentrify this town any further than it is. And what's being called historical preservation really isn't preservation at all. It's just gentrification, masses preservation. And I urge people to vote no on this based on that. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, we have final two-minute speakers. Microphone number 2.
Hi, my name is Lucille Fisher. I live at 3 Kenny Road, and I am a member of the Medfield State Hospital Master Planning Resource Committee. A gentleman got up earlier and talked about how we needed to think of the future. We need to think about children. And I absolutely agree with him. I think I want to point out that on the back page of your warrant, it says the plan in this zoning article meets Medfield's priorities for reuse, namely to maintain and enhance the character and the values of the town of Medfield and its residents. I too appreciate everything that John Harney, Bill Massaro, and John Thompson has done for this town. We need to move forward. We need to, that's all we're doing is we are passing zoning that actually gives us tremendous control. We are not losing control. There's controls all the way through this process. So let's think about the kids in the future. We have an opportunity to put something spectacular up there. Let's at least see what the possibilities are. Thank you. I urge you to vote yes, please.
Thank you. Microphone number 1.
Hi, Dan Tuig, 7 Stewart Street. Before I begin my comment, I just want to thank everyone up on the dais for all the hard work that they've put into this. Whether I agree with you or not, you devoted a lot of time, and I appreciate that. I think everyone else here appreciates that as well. I also want to make one comment that I'm a newer resident to Medfield, just a little over a year, but I'm very impressed by how democracy works in this town. And this is how we should. It's been civil all night, and this is wonderful. That said, my big... I'm being civil still. That said, one of my biggest concerns, one of the reasons we moved to Medfield, we have 2 young children, was for the school system and for the small town feel and for the small town aspect. This development is going to, it won't destroy it, but it's really going to chip away at it. What the other people have spoken about the school system right now, the student-teacher ratio is going in the wrong direction. The fact that last year we had to have a lottery for full-day kindergarten. You know, it's not going in the right direction. And with the addition of all of these housing units, it's going to get worse. What are the education ratings going to be for Medfield in 5-10 years if we let this continue? I'm really concerned about my kids, and I hope you are concerned about your kids and the impact that this will have on their schools. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for your pitch for democracy, which got a little round of applause. Okay, we're down to 1 minute now for our final speakers.
Yep. Chris Potts, 7 Curb Street. I will be totally honest, and this may come as a surprise to some of the people who are very much for this zoning. I was undecided until probably the last 4 or 5 days. And I have deep respect for the people on the opposing side of this, in particular John Thompson, who is so smart and so dedicated. And in the end, I believe that the historic nature of this property is such. If anyone has ever read the actual application that was filed to the National Historic Registry, I urge you to look at it because it is fascinating. There are world-renowned architects who have built those buildings, and honestly, they are gems and they are incorporated into the whole story of that campus, and incorporates both open space and architectural history. And if there's, and what I gleaned in my last moments of deciding how I was going to vote is that there's any chance of preserving the historical significance of that property, we have to vote yes on this proposal.
Thank you. Thank you for number 2.
Bay Bancroft, 44 Foundry Street. Someone has suggested in one of the mailings that the first question we should ask ourselves apropos this rezoning is, what's in it for me? Well, to answer for myself, the best thing would be simply knowing that Medfield still can muster the forward-looking can-do spirit, the resources, and the confidence, the moxie, to bring alive for a new day the gorgeous old state hospital site. It would be knowing that we care and we dare to honor the hospital's past by launching within its bounds a richly human-centered, vibrant, and creative new future. A new life which will draw inspiration from the beauty and dignity of the venerable, tree-shaded, see if I can read my draft here, from the venerable tree-shaded setting with its elegant 19th century buildings, and which will infuse them with a fitting blend of new uses which we ourselves have chosen. Now, to shorten this to my minute, okay. As someone who once served for 25 years in planning and zoning in Medfield, but was not involved in this project, I'd like to put this hospital master plan and the zoning that goes with it in perspective. This is not any old plan. This is a stunningly comprehensive, rigorously specific, realistically balanced, responsibly inclusive, historically attuned template for the reuse of this site. This plan is a national award-winning product of citizen-centered town planning here in Medfield via a fully open consensus-seeking process featuring broad and welcomed and sometimes predictably contentious community input from start to finish.
Thank you.
For this,
Thank you very much. Okay, these are our final 1-minute comments here.
I'll try. I'm Ann Thompson from 9 Turtlebrook Way, a 55-year resident of Medfield. When we moved here, my next-door neighbor on North Street had grown up here, and I asked them what they thought about the new developments, Pine Needle Park, Indian Hill, Marlin Road, etc. And they told us in the beginning they hated it. They hated all these young guys coming in. But then he said, then he looked around, he said, and they were just like you and Andy. I had the Girl Scout troop my first year I was here, despite the fact being pregnant. My husband had a Little League team the first year. And Mr. Lucci said, and that's why the new people were good. They changed the town and they helped and they fit right in and did a lot to make our town good. So I'm lucky enough to have 2 children that live here, grandchildren that live here, and I very much hope the town will go ahead with this project because I think it's the best thing for the present and the future.
Thank you very much, Ed.
David Temple, lifelong resident so far of Medfield. I'm late to the microphone because I spent all this time trying to get my head around this proposal. It's extremely complex. I don't know all the answers. I don't think anybody knows all the answers. But I have great respect for the people on both sides of it. But I think what is being presented is a reasonable plan with plenty of checks and balances further down the road. And at this point, I've concluded I will vote yes, and I'd encourage you to vote yes, because I think we should not let perfect be the enemy of the good, and this is a step forward.
Thank you.
I'm Patrick Dalton from 44 Bridge Street. I heard the groans, I'll try to be quick. I'm not as cute as I once was, I know that, but it wasn't too long ago that I was one of the kids of Medfield. I went through the school system here. I went off into the world. People are really concerned about what about the education. My education was great here. And when I've gone off and worked in different schools all across the country, I can tell you our education is still great here. We have the opportunity to do something really, really cool here. And if you want to preserve these buildings, a vote yes is a step in the right direction. But again, these are all just plans for now. But nothing's going to happen if we don't say yes now.
Thank you.
Hello, I'm John Dalton, the younger of 44 Bridge Street. I think I urge a vote yes, as I think it's a step, and simply just a step in the right direction. But also, I've heard a lot of the revenue from like having movies come in the industry that I work in, which is very closely related to movies. I can tell you that the grass is greener in film because it probably doesn't exist in the first place, and it's much easier to create a landscape with a computer and render it through a computer, and the film revenue will dry up eventually. So I urge a vote yes, just for that simple fact. We can't depend on that. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, last remark.
I'm Megan Sullivan of 36 Wichita Road, and I'm a member of the Transfer Station and Recycling Committee. I think about the housing and what was mentioned before in terms of where the developments are popping up, and I'd just like to say that I think this gives us a chance to think about where we can put some developments potentially, instead of letting them be surprises while we try to meet the 40B. This gives us at least the chance to think about being proactive. And I guess that's the thing where I think about this decision tonight. It's, I approach decisions, is it inclusive? Is it asking more? Is it bringing in more ideas? Or is it shutting things down? If I can include people or an idea, I'd like to do that. And I think we're at this time tonight. We've seen the pros and cons. There are concerns about traffic, what's going to happen to the schools. But I think right now we have to say, let's find out. And that's why we need to vote yes tonight, find out. We come back in a year, we can reassess and hear what everybody else has to say. But if we don't vote yes tonight, we're really limiting our options. And let's just give it some time and see what happens. So I encourage you to vote yes.
Thank you. Okay, I would like to thank everyone who has worked extremely hard over the years, who has brought amazing dedication and commitment and focus and energy and time and skill and insight and experience on all sides of this question, some of whom I actually had to cut off tonight. So there's a little bit of an irony of some of these folks putting hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of hours into this, and I'm cutting them off at 2 minutes. And I appreciate your understanding about that, but I think we heard tonight a very good exchange, and I think we're prepared to vote. So, we're ready to go in terms of the vote on the motion. We're going to follow our usual procedures, and we're going to start with a voice vote. A vote in favor would be a vote in favor of the passage of the motion that was presented by the Warrant Committee. A vote opposed, a no vote, would be against that motion. So first on a voice vote, all in favor, please say aye. Aye. All opposed, please say no. No. Okay, if you could raise your hands. All in favor, please raise your hand. All opposed? Okay, we're going to have to take a vote by standing count, which we probably have done anyway. I'm going to ask I know. I can tell by the sense in this room anyway, but I'll ask Conrad, is that the sense in the other room that we have a split? We could do that in the cafeteria. Raise your hand if you're in favor. And now, I think, please raise your hand if you're opposed. And I'll get a signal from Conrad. I'm assuming that We had a strong split of opinion in that room as well? Okay. Okay, well, let me just see a show of hands again. In this room, all in favor, raise your hand. Opposed? Okay, well, obviously the issue is that this requires a 2/3 vote, so it's very, very difficult to judge from up here what constitutes 2/3. So we're going to have to just stay a few more minutes and do a standing count. Now, in order to do this, if you are voters over there? You've got to find some place in the stands or in the seats. Everybody in the cafeteria as well, you need to find your way to the seats. Got a few seats up front. So if you intend to be counted, you need to be in either the seats in the cafeteria or in one of our sections here in the gym. You ready to go, Conrad? Okay. We got counters in the cafeteria ready? Okay, thank you. Okay, would you please stand if you are in favor of the motion? And please remain standing until I tell you otherwise. And please do not move around. Stay in one place, and please remain standing. I don't vote. Okay, please remain standing. Okay, we're good. Okay, you may be seated. It's been a long night getting up and down, right? So if you are opposed, if your vote is no, please stand. And please remain standing, and please stand in one place if you would. What was the... Thank you. You can be seated. Thank you very much. What happened to the music when we needed it? They do that in the 7th inning. This is the 9th inning right now. Yeah. For a plug for the holiday stroll, okay? Right. Main Street, Medfield, and more, December 6th, 4 to 9. Okay, it's a great event, another great event. I'll do my thank yous now. I want to thank Chris Allen, who does our sound as a volunteer and does a highly professional job for us. Thank you very much. I want to thank Medfield TV, not just for what they're doing tonight, but for what they do all the time for us, and that's much appreciated. Thank you. I want to thank my friends on the Warrant Committee. When I induced them to come on the Warrant Committee, I told them that most of the work happens between January and April, and here they have been all fall, and I really appreciate that. So thank you very much. Okay. To our selectmen as well, so thank you. Although unlike the moderator, they do get, I think, $600, right? Yeah. So. Well, thank you. Yes. In a moment, we'll thank the counters. David, you want to pitch for the Historic Commission? I'm sorry, what's happening over there? Oh. Really? More pitch from Evan. The Angel Run, another great town event on December 8th. Okay, be there. 68%. 60%, 51, 295. For ayes in favor, we had 651 votes. As opposed, 295 votes. That constitutes a percentage of 68.8%. The motion carries. Have a great night.
The proceeding was a production of Medfield TV, Community Shows.